One of the big challenges in scaling innovative practices I've seen is actually planning for success. So what if we are successful? Then we have more success, and then we can't grow fast enough. And that one of the, not the only bottleneck there is money. Is that what you're enabling? And how far out do you go? Because of course, if you miscalculate, then you have a big bet, and then it doesn't work. But when you are too pessimistic, then I've seen it's also a barrier actually. How do you think of that, and what kind of time horizon do you have for your investments?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things that we do for each investment is we're measuring impact. So by measuring impact, I think that's one of the hardest questions that people typically ask. And especially we were talking about before, the double bottom line approach, because it is such a new area in terms of how do we measure impact? It's not just the measurement, but then sharing it as well. So for us, because we're so hyper-focused with our fund, if you look at the AEC industry, really there's only a few VCs, and they only started emerging in 2015. Brick and mortar was one of the first ones, and since then there's been a dozen that have emerged. But we're hyper-focused on housing, and our goal is to reduce housing costs by half. So any investment we make, the very first thing we do is we're looking at the metrics that they're promising today as a very early stage startup. How can you be reducing cost and time in your specific bucket of the construction value chain? So before, when I was presenting, I showed one slide that had the full construction value chain, and we're hyper-focusing on that one bucket that they're promising. And the one thing about founders is that the thing that they're promising today, the innovation that they're promising today, is not what they're going to be doing in 2 years, in 5 years, or in 10 years. So when we are vouching for them, when we are investing in them, we're actually investing in the founders themselves and their thirst to change the industry. So the way that we're measuring impact has to actually be very catered to the startup itself and the types of connections that we're promising with them. So for example, with Airworks, we're connecting them to the government in Panama. And what we'll be tracking is, let's take a traditional project. So if it has 100 hectares of land, how long would this take you to do? How much money would you spend as a whole? And now with Airworks, let's do a pilot project and test the same thing, directly compare the two, and then do more pilot projects in other countries and then continuously compare them. So it's all about comparing very specific projects of the traditional method with the improved method along the lifespan of the startup. In terms of scalability, I mean, that's startup to startup in terms of creating a scalable model. And I think Amy covered that very well in terms of thinking more like products. And it's not just a linear trajectory, but really thinking more like a tech company. So starting off with customer discovery and following the full product development phasing is incredibly important, even though in the AEC industry, that's not necessarily taught in education. But I mean, at Stanford it is. We have to have more universities doing that because it's looking more and more like the tech sector.
I'd like to comment on that. I think that there's a lot that I agree with in that, but there's something that I think is really challenging in what Julieta said, and particularly the notion that you would expect. The implication is that if you measure the impact from a traditional to a new on a project basis and make a decision based on that granularity, then you will stay in the quicksand of the AEC until hell freezes over. And I mean that totally, right? So I could not disagree with that comment any more than that. Essentially, if you don't think in terms of a investment that looks at it over a period of time, imagine that it takes Toyota, who is a 100-year-old company that is well established in all pieces, multiple billions of dollars to launch a product. Okay, it takes 5 years for them to do it and multiple billions of dollars. And then at that point, they have to make millions in order to recap that investment. And the notion that anybody can create a more efficient thing coming out of the gate is insanity. So I want to dispel the myth of someone who's in the midst of doing this for the last 10 years, that is a reasonable condition of success. Then I don't, and I don't mean to be tense with you. I just am saying that I don't want that notion to permeate, because it will kill us.
By the way, Chris Giattina makes me look nice. He makes me look nice, just so you know, because he's not. Yeah. You're not wrong, Chris. By the way, what she's saying a little differently is if you have a product and it's established. I think if you put that caveat on it, Julieta, that if this product is already established and you've done it many times before, you can take it to a different geo and compare it. The problem that Chris is saying is real in our AEC space, which is, I've never done this prefabricated element before. Let me try it once and see if it's better than conventional. And then you're dead, because we don't have skill set or scopes or insurance or platforms or business that supported that learning, because we're not in it. We're very project centric, and people have to be in it for the long game. He's saying products win in the long game, not in the first time you make it versus, something that's been done for 200 years.
I think that's right. I think you have to be true to the word industrial. So I think we maybe got lost around, scaling up tech, which, VC love. And I think we need to find capital that supports success in an industrial way of thinking, capacity planning. I feel for Chris, it is about building factories. We say, oh, well, here are the kit of parts that make up this car, but let's not put the $1 billion factory in the photo, because actually the kit of part without the factory doesn't work. And the factory to make one, that's $1 billion car. It's a bit expensive for a car. So we need to really think about what are the challenges of industrial thinking. And I think a couple of things that I think you talked, Daniel, about longitudinal projects. I think it's very important that the business model gets us to version 2 and version 3. What we forget is, version 3 is unbeatable. Version 1 of the iPhone is nice. Version 2 kind of work. Version 3, well, I mean, it takes Google to buy Motorola. It takes Google to buy Android and give it for free to Samsung. And it takes Samsung to pay $600 million fine to copy the version 3. That's how much it takes to beat version 3. Let's build version 3 and let's figure out how, like Chris is doing, we build that flexibility into the new business model that delivers from a stable, industrialized, product-centric, next one is better. And that's a different venture capital mindset. It takes years.
So we're 10 years in and we're
sorry, quickly, we are very rapidly approaching 12:30, and I know that some of you have some other commitments you need to jump to. So I want to obviously say that's okay. I know Julieta has a podcast to do, and others may have commitment as well. I don't know. But we are okay. If a few of you are okay to go a little bit longer, because I think this really interesting conversation, then we should, but also you should absolutely feel free to drop off in about 30 seconds. So I don't know if you have one question I was going to ask, a sort of a closing question, and I don't know if you have a quick thought, Julieta. What is the biggest barrier in achieving your vision, and what is the biggest force you have going for you?
I actually have to hop off to do a podcast, but it was lovely to meet you all. Thank you very much, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah. All right.
Hey, can I answer that, Martin? Since I'm the only other woman on the panel, I'll take her spot. How's that?
Yeah.
I would say that one of the biggest barriers, honestly, is Chris and I are warriors for the truth in life, right? With this space. And anyone that tells you that there's one product, one software product, one, physical product, any one thing that's going to make this work is wrong. And that's the problem. Everybody, I'm glad we teach entrepreneurial skillship at Stanford, but at the end of the day, it's going to take, we're not an industry, we're an ecosystem of disparate industries that have different drivers, lots of which have waste in them, and not one ring to rule them all. That's the one thing I will say. You need to go with the biggest players that can create the most influence, and then make sure that those big players are letting other people into the space to do that sliver of what, like Chris just said, he's got amazing stuff there built on Forge that do a particular thing, a specific thing, but he's not going to recreate Autodesk. He does a great thing that makes Autodesk products work better. And I think, and I'm not, again, any platform, whatever that is, you cannot think I should wear a t-shirt every day. Chris knows I say, you're not big enough. None of us are big enough on our own to make this happen by ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's really a good point. I think our ecosystem is vast. And again, taking the industrialized mindset, if you think about the scale of our industry, and you say, well, I'm gonna compare it to mobility, and you say, well, actually, it's quite a bit smaller than mobility. And remember, we don't make train the same way as we make planes or scooters or railway system for that matter. And so our industry is vast and we need to look at products. And really, I think there are a couple of things around products that really we need to focus on. The first one is, what's the product? Product is space, right? Product is experience. And what we've learned from making products is that it's not necessarily in the thing that the value lies, like you were saying, Amy, with the Sonos. You know, it's about the outcome that we deliver. If we're making a school, because ultimately what we're trying to do in the example of the UK, where we have a pipeline for products, but what are these outcomes we're seeking for? We are seeking, yes, net zero impact, but great educational outcome. What do great educational spaces look like, right? And that's what we're trying to sell. And as soon as you get to that mindset, that it's about better health outcomes, then we are starting to really build into the product. If a car company sells a product per square foot or per ton, well, I'm sorry, it's just never gonna be profitable. You know, the real value of product thinking and of industrialized thinking is serving the customer better in a more controlled way and a circular way. And I think we should not try to make cheap cars. I mean, industrialized construction has been tried before, but you know, it was by the country that made ladders and at the same time made you know, Vladivostok. Well, let's get forward 50 years on and make great products.
Hey, Alan, by the way, it's not that it's been done before. Right now, it's in all the secret places behind the walls, below the ground, above the ceilings. Lots of products are being made every single day that, you know, you just draw as geometric spaces, but then they actually get filled in with real products. We need that thinking. And I agree with everything you said. I want to free Alain up to do all the things you just said so that you don't ever have to draw fire stairs again, or an MEP rack, or a bathroom pod, or any of those things, that you set the true architecture of the parameters of the feeling of that space, the sustainability of it, the longevity, the availability of those components by connecting in the ecosystem, true designers and makers in real time. So you can be the most empowered architect you can ever be. That's what's really important about productization. It's going to free you from all those constraints to spend the time to be what you really got into this business to do. What's
your experience, Daniel, with the students? Because as I listened to Chris, if you showed this presentation, Chris, to a 20-year-old, they would just look at it and so, what's new here? What else would you do? Like, is there some other way to make buildings? Seriously, that would be their reaction, and I think justifiably so. And so, what is that? Does that match your experience over in Switzerland, Danny? And then how do you see the, you know, their expectations and their visions shaping our future?
This is exactly why I think it's important that we reframe our education and we don't put on our legacy of fragmentation and infighting onto the next generation. Same experience as you, Martin. You know, even when we talk about something like integrated project delivery, which is just a project delivery model, not necessarily an industrialized construction delivery model, it's almost like, yeah, so what? Of course we're going to collaborate. Of course we're going to work together. And it's the same with industrialized construction. And then they get kind of institutionalized with, this is what an architect does, and here are the boundaries of what an architect is allowed to do, and here's how you should think about yourself professionally as an architect. And so what we're seeing, and this kind of goes to one of the papers I referred to, is that product architecture mirrors technical knowledge. And so we partition our knowledge into a system that matches our product architecture. So the mechanical engineer knows about the mechanical system. It makes sense. It's a good idea. But then when you start to redefine the product architecture, you start to, like Benjamin showed earlier, a smart slab with an integrated 3D printed MEP system. Who is responsible for that? Is there, you know, does that need to be a new position? You start to see a little bit of a blurring of the lines or a breaking of the mirror. And that's what we're also trying to do with education, so that we don't think in such strict boundaries. So absolutely, we see this, we see that the students don't really understand the fragmentation that binds them. And I want to free them up to explore that even further.
So I think there's actually quite a few questions in the chat. I don't know to the extent that some of you can double task, can ask a few of them, and answer a few of them. I think one of them, I think is maybe quite interesting for all of us, is the role of open standards on the information side, on the technology side, on the hardware side, etc. How much are you using open standards? How much are you contributing to open standards? Where is that? I believe that's a big part of your vision, Alain, that you outlined. Maybe if you want to kick us off, and then I'm curious, Chris, to what extent did you just put things together as you had to, as I at least see project teams doing, and to what extent are you using open standard type, open standards, and to what extent are you maybe even contributing to them? And then we can see what Damien and Daniel have to say.
I mean, obviously, and I'm known for it. You know, I think it's essential, and I think we know that most of the internet is built on open standards, and I think my personal point of view is that the built world is too important not to be built on open standards. Now, you know, ultimately, you know, communication was absolutely revolutionized when we went, you know, open standard email, and we weren't trapped into these closed ecosystem. Now, of course, venture capital does require trapping the customers, and that is the most efficient way of making money, but it is certainly not the best way. And I think we have a bit of a European mindset on that. But you know, without being too controversial, let's be pragmatic. This industry, the designers, the computational thinkers, they're all creating increasingly complex set of tools that need to work together, and I think they are co-creating open standards. And you know, you can enumerate them. You've got the speckle guys, you've got the blender guys. And it's fantastic, and you know, I think firms should be encouraged to put their money where their mouth is. And you know, Apple has open sourced its own code, because ultimately that is how the firm uses the code that is its IP. It's not the ability to move data out of BIM 360 into an open cloud. It's not its ability to move data from Grasshopper into ANSYS. You know, that should be freed. The data should be freed, and hopefully the big buyers will use their procurement power to make that happen. So I would, for example, highlight that the AEC software vendor would not be allowed to sell their software to the health service in the UK, for example, because their API does not pass an open API standard. They would be deemed as too closed and too proprietary, and creating dangerous vendor lock-in. And I think that's the kind of things that you know, as a society, you know, I saw Microsoft sign up to open data standards and the like, and I think it's very important that we push towards that and create an ecosystem that's open.
You know, I have to respond now because you called me out, basically. I mean, Alain loves to challenge me and argue for sport. I think I won the last few rounds we've had, though, Alain, just for, you know, argument's sake. You know, look, at the end of the day, you guys are almost like talking to the end state of all the little details of everything we got to work out for IP. We're not even like out of the primordial ooze yet. I'm just saying, like, let's face facts. Like, you're going to argue with me about open standards and, you know, right. You can't say right now that there's not a portfolio of products that exist that have open APIs that you can connect to, that you can share the data across. It might not be your platform of choice, but there's also Apple and Samsung out there right now. And we're not even close to that kind of conversation. So I think, unfortunately, every guy that wants to say what their product is better and that we should, it's funny, at the same time you say, like, we have this platform that should be with our things in our supply chain, it should be like, but everyone else should do it open. So unfortunately, we have to look at reality and reality of what exists. Currently, you have people on this planet that have behaviors and tools and training and skill set that exist in certain portfolio products, regardless of whose they are. And we have to make sure that we're enabling the connectivity of those products and those skill sets with other people's products, ours, the competitors. I hope you heard me say that, Alain, because we're definitely open to doing that at Autodesk. And you saw the big, I think we have more logos on there than anybody else, I'll say, right? So in order to get where you want to go, you can't get to all these parameters in the end state without understanding that you can't change it all at once. You cannot. You cannot think that all of a sudden you're going to change tools, change processes, change business models, change behaviors, change technology all at the same time. Because you know what you get when you try to do that? Nothing. You get nothing. You have to understand how to get there, doing the right things at the right times with the right people. And by the way, it's one of the reasons why I got an iPhone and somebody else has a Samsung. I'm not buying Bob's computerized phone system. I don't, because I want this thing to work and be connected to all the other apps and things that are theirs, that are not theirs in the planet, right? So we can learn from some other industries. I know it's a shocking thought. Like, I know it's crazy, but some people have kind of figured this stuff out. Like, just saying, we don't have to start with something completely different just because we happen to be in AEC.
Yeah, well, I think this could be better. No, I love the engagement here. Although I have to say, when we have a burning platform, when we are really challenged, we can change all of these things at once. Actually, I have seen AEC people do it. And
is that
so
how it happens tomorrow? Is it? If we all decide, does it change? Does it change?
That was an interesting reflection. Those are really at our last conference. There was a couple interesting reflections or speakers. One speaker said, a bit like Chris also pointed out, if we have to make money with an innovation on the first project, it's a non-starter. And another speaker, that was Eric from Swinnerton, and just made one of the top 25 newsmakers in the US. And then we had another speaker, Niels from Denmark, saying, if the technology doesn't provide value on the first project, it's a non-starter. So totally opposing perspectives and experiences. So I realize we're not going to solve this here in the minus 30 seconds we have left. But I'm just curious, yeah, Chris, in terms of open standards, how important are they right now, and how important do you see them being in the future?
So we're Open Kimono. Our work is open API. We only work with open APIs unless there's not another route. I recently juried some innovation awards, and we highly valued the notion of open source and collaboration in order to get that to work. That does not mean it has to be. So I'm just saying that from the perspective that I'm looking at it is we are trying to move. We're trying to move mountains, and it takes a lot of people working on it. And when everybody tries to monetize their specific thing and then hold it back, I believe it retards the overall ability for us to move fluidly through it. So, I mean, we have in-house a dozen people that are focused, you know, instead of the 2,000 that Amy has, we have, you know, a half a dozen or so people that are working on our pieces. But ultimately, in order for that to really work, it has to have an audience beyond us. So I don't want us to be an echo chamber. I think that's a tendency in this piece. I also, even though you didn't give me this as a question, I want to challenge the Academy, of which I'm a part of in terms of teaching fifth-year thesis for, you know, a decade plus, is what is the Academy doing to change the notion of what it is that they should make? Because if everything is a organic structure that is digitally produced, that has no added components of mechanical, electrical, plumbing to service it, and if it really becomes a structural notion of space, are we really moving the needle? And I'm not saying it shouldn't look at that. What I'm trying to say is, how does the Academy reinforce the notion that understanding the totality of the problem is a worthy pursuit? And that's all I'd ask you, Martin, and Daniel. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, in a nutshell, we call it high performance building building much more than buildings. But anyway, we are well over time. There's an opportunity to continue the conversation with those that can stay on the Remo networking platform. There's a link in the chat right now, so if you can stay and connect and explore these questions further. So I want to invite Daniel and Jerko for a couple closing comments, and also want to express my big thanks to Mark, Teddy, and Juliana for all the work that really made this possible. And of course, the panelists for very insightful presentations, and also a fun discussion here, which we should continue.
Yeah, just as a final word, and yeah, I want to especially highlight Juliana, who is a current Stanford bachelor student, for her exceptional work organizing this forum, all of the social media posts, the Remo platform. She really did a great job. So those of you that are recruiting in industrialized construction, keep her in mind. You know, from my side, a final word. You know, every year it's a lot of work to put these events on, and I always wonder, you know, maybe 2 days before, you know, yeah, was it worth it? And every year I come away inspired and just full of energy for where we're going. And I think we're diversifying the topics that exist here at the IC Forum. We're having deeper conversations for sure than 7 years ago, but even from 1 or 2 years ago. In my mind, there's a lot of open questions. There's a lot of things to debate, and the forum is a forum like this is the right place to debate those questions, because it's not clear where we're going to go. We're having a lot of change, but it's not clear what the right models, what the right data structures, what the right production approaches are going to be. And as Amy says, there'll be multiple ones. Yeah, I look forward to continuing that conversation, and thanks to all of you that attended, and we'll see you next year.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, on my end, I completely agree. I think what we have, it's been quite a journey from yesterday to today. I think very inspiring. We opened up with, to me, the most important question of them all. I mean, sustainability, how we can really accelerate that. And I think we saw and heard many angles of seeing that industrialized construction is a good vehicle to do that. It actually has a lot of the prerequisites for actually accelerating our sustainability work, which is so necessary. So I think that was very inspiring, and in a way felt some hope in that sense. And then we dug deeper into sort of some of the pieces of industrialized construction, some interesting digital tools yesterday. We saw new production methods today in 3D printing and robotics. And now we zoomed out in this last session to sort of tie together the more like the concept, talking about products, platforms, software, and so on. So I think we sort of covered what we mean is industrialized construction. But I'm actually also curious, Martin. You said yesterday when we opened up that you would keep an eye on what we mean is industrialized construction. So I'm a little curious on how you feel about that. Did we tie together completely, or what's your thought?
It's my quick reflection, because I think we really need to formally end, that we can do a better job next year in focusing on the "and" part that I mentioned. Just a quick, I'll leave it at that. I mean, I totally agree with you. I was totally inspired by many of the applications, and the examples are amazing, and really feel energized, as Daniel also said. So really thank all the speakers and also the participants for sharing their comments and questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can, and we'll also share as much as we can from the conference through our webpage. So I think we should formally close this venue here, and as I said, those that can jump over to the networking platform, please do so, and well, I hope to see you for sure next year, but also hopefully before along the way. All right.